Institute of Risk Management South Africa has published the 9th edition of the annual risk report. The findings reveal that the country has for some time been experiencing a surge in social unrest and wild protests. It says poor service delivery, poverty, inequality, unemployment and corruption are at the core of the protests. We're now joined by Trevor Ngwane, a South African socialist and anti-apartheid activist. Thank you very much, sir, for your time this afternoon. While this is nothing new, how would you explain this to somebody who does not know the context of South Africa, where you find people from even Diepsloot that take their grievances to the highest office in the land and will march to the union buildings insisting on seeing the president of the country so he sees what the masses are faced with?
Yes. Unfortunately, South Africa is ruled by leaders, politicians and captains of industry who don't care much about the masses, about the working class, about the poor. So that uncaring attitude is found actually everywhere where you have the capitalist system. But it is worse in countries like South Africa because of the legacy of colonialism and of apartheid, because inside that class uncaring attitude, there is also racism. So it's almost as if some types of human beings, their needs don't really matter. So I think this is the problem we're facing, where, you know, certain humanities don't really count, don't really feature, you know, in the boardrooms of the rich and powerful.
You accuse the leaders of the day of not caring for their population or the masses. There are a number of them that will disagree with you because they will point out how the Constitution of this country is the best in the world, how there's so many policies that are in place to address the wrongs of the past, and while we want things to be sorted out in no time, it's going to take a little bit more time than almost 30 years to turn the tide in South Africa. And so you've also got the National Development Plan, amongst many other plans in South Africa, the National Development Plan of 2030. When you take a look at 2030, maybe let's say we are in 2030 looking backwards, what does that look like to you?
The problem now, Tutu, is that it's not only the problems facing ordinary people, facing the working class, indeed facing the country. The biggest problem now is that we are living and have to cope with the consequences. So when you talk of 2030, you know, I think matters will be real bad. There will be devastation given what we see happening today. So, for example, the problem of unemployment, one result, one consequence is a rise in crime. It's a rise in homelessness, in destitution, because people cannot find money to take care of their families, to feed themselves. People get frustrated. You have an increase in drug abuse, alcohol abuse, basically loss of hope. Today, we're faced with ecological crisis. So climate change, you know, we can talk about it, but we're now living with its consequences. Floods, people dying in floods in Devon. I see there are floods in Cape Town, droughts, cyclones. So I think in the next 10, 20, 30 years, there will be devastation unless there's a real change of direction, not only for South Africa, but for the world, indeed.
The Institute of Risk Management, in sounding the alarm about the number of crises that are facing South Africa, has also got some recommendations. And one of those is tackling high levels of inequality through the implementation of policies promoting social and economic equity. Measures such as progressive taxation, enhanced access to education and healthcare, and land reform should be employed. And so when you take a look at South Africa's reform agenda, what would your assessment be?
Well, there's one sentence in that document which I found slightly problematic, because basically the Institute says by aligning with government priorities. So it's exactly your question, Dudu. You know, how far has the South African government gone and succeeded in implementing all the great policies and all the great constitutional pro-poor, you know, pro-development policies? Not very far. So I think that the Institute, you know, its stance, it's pro-government, it's pro-status quo. So basically, it supports the existing system. And as such, I don't think that we'll find a solution. Remember, apartheid was a form of capitalism, racial capitalism. You know, slavery indeed was capitalism. So I think unless we take a radical change away from the current policies, we'll just, you know, keep on complaining, dealing with problems, dealing with the compounding of these problems, because the problems also intersect and overlap. You know, they compound, and then there's also the consequences of the problems which feed back to the original problem. So really, this country must take a different direction.
And it's incumbent upon whom that happens when you assess the political landscape, you assess the landscape of civil society groups in South Africa, and so it goes, because you'll find that in some instances when government does try to do or put in place certain interventions or measures in terms of redress, then you've got certain sectors of society that will head on over to the courts to challenge that, right? And there's a number of examples maybe that we can point to, for instance, the apartheid flag, for instance, when you speak about social cohesion in this country. And all of that is done in the name of we all enjoy this constitution. And so this constitution that we all enjoy, while there's some sectors of society that say, we're not sure whether this works for us, what there needs to be done, is it time to reimagine it?
Certainly. You know, the Constitution, it supports some real and just perspectives, such as the protection of private property, insofar as it applies to land, to factories, to farms, basically to the wealth. So what it means is that from the days of conquest, colonialism, apartheid, racial capitalism, all those people who enriched themselves, you know, through those exploitative, oppressive laws, they must keep the wealth. So I think that is the key problem. So whatever, you know, we talk about, we cannot avoid questioning, challenging vested interest. We cannot avoid having to go to Oppenheimer, Anglo-American, these days even Mutsepe, the aspirant black bourgeoisie, and saying you have no right to that great wealth. That wealth belongs to the masses, belongs to the people. I don't think that Mutsepe or Oppenheimer is going to agree. So the burden is on the oppressed, on the exploited, to reorganize themselves, to rebuild their organizations, to revitalize their strategy and their organizations, and actually demand a change. I don't think that the solution will be, let's say, the collapse of the ANC next year, 2024. Yes, it must go because it has failed. But you can see that none of the opposition political parties really have a solution. Most of them are as corrupt, as inept, as greedy, you know, as lacking imagination as the ANC. So it's ordinary people, it's the working class, it's the poor who must start believing in themselves, rebuild that confidence. The same power, vision, which helped them to defeat the apartheid monster can help them to defeat this particular monster, which is the capitalist system, which is a system which makes the rich richer, the poor poorer. A system
Mr.
which
Ngwane,
continues.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we can afford this evening.